All right, so if one of the countries that I study quite a bit is India, in particular, the political system of India. So if you're working on a project that involves India, you might benefit from a quick introduction. This is a very basic crash course in Indian government and Indian politics. Obviously, the usual sources for further information, which I've covered in other videos, is where you should turn if you want more details. But basically, here's the important stuff. So India is a federal republic, kind of like the United States. So it's split into different states. So you can see here, this is the political map of India. These are all different states. So Maharashtra, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, these are all different states. So as in the US, each of these states has its own government, and then there's also a national or central government that runs the country as a whole. Compared to the US, the central government in India has a lot more power relative to the state governments, although for institutional reasons, the states are actually do have a reasonable amount of influence. So unlike the United States, India is a parliamentary democracy. So after India gained independence from the British, India largely kept the British system of government. They essentially adopted the Westminster model. So what this means is the country is divided up into a bunch of parliamentary constituencies, and each of these constituencies will elect its own representative to the lower house of parliament, which is called the Lok Sabha, the people's constituency. So if we go here, you can see here is the results from the 2004 general election. So you can see each of these is a parliamentary constituency, and you can see here it's color-coded based on the winner. So these saffron ones are the BJP, and these blue ones are the Indian National Congress. So I'll talk about what those parties are in a moment. And you can see if we go in greater detail, so if we look at Bihar's election results, you can see basically each of these constituencies has a number, it has a name, and so they're basically electing their representative. Whichever representative or whichever candidate gets the most votes will go to the to Parliament, and they are members of a party, of course, and so they will then determine the government of. So basically, the lower house, the Lok Sabha, will elect all of its representatives. Then whichever party or coalition has the most candidates, won the most seats, will be able to determine the prime minister. They will sort of choose the prime minister and elect him or her. So currently the BJP and its coalition have the most seats, and so they chose the current prime minister. So Narendra Modi is the prime minister that they've chosen for now. So the Lok Sabha is the lower house of parliament, and as in Britain, the lower house actually holds much of the power. So the Lok Sabha is kind of like the House of Commons in Britain. And as in Britain, there's also an upper house called the Rajya Sabha. So unlike the House of Lords in Britain, the Rajya Sabha, its members are actually sort of chosen by a system that's kind of complicated and a little weird. I'm not going to get into the details of that right now, but sort of keep that in mind, that there are two houses. Now, as I said, so this is how things work at the national level. At the state level, it's actually very, very similar. So each state's government, instead of having a parliament, it has an assembly, but basically it works very much like the parliament. So each state is divided into assembly constituencies. So here is Uttaranchal, which is now called Uttarakhand. So this is the results for that determine the assembly of Uttarakhand. So these are all assembly constituencies. Each of these assembly constituencies will select a member of the legislative assembly who will represent that constituency in the state assembly, and whichever party gets the most seats or whichever coalition gets the most seats will be able to choose the choose the government, or rather choose the chief minister of the state, which is the state analog of the prime minister. Now, the actual so I mentioned coalitions. So typically in Indian politics, it's very rare for a single party to get a majority, especially at the national level. So in the most recent election in 2014, you can see over here that there were basically two major axes here. So one was the National Democratic Alliance, led by the Bharatiya Janata Party, and the other is the United Progressive Alliance, led by the Indian National Congress. So you can see here, each of these has, so in addition to the largest party here, so you can see the BJP won 282 seats, but there are also all these other parties in their coalition, the Shiv Sena, Telugu Desam Party, etc., like a long, long list. So there are dozens, if not hundreds, of parties competing at the national level in India, and many more competing at the state level. But yeah, so their coalition, in addition to the seats won by the leading party, there's also quite a few seats won by the smaller parties. And the same goes for the United Progressive Alliance. So the Indian National Congress won a lot fewer seats than the BJP here, and their coalition did a lot worse. So this was a crushing defeat for the United Progressive Alliance in the most recent election. So I've mentioned these parties already. Who are these parties here? So the most important ones are, so first of all, the Indian National Congress here. So historically, this party has essentially been the dominant force in Indian politics. So the Indian National Congress was sort of the party that led India's push for independence originally. After India gained independence, its leader, Jawaharlal Nehru, became the first Prime Minister of India. Now, since then, the party has largely been run by his descendants. So in particular, his daughter, Indira. So she happened to marry a guy named Gandhi. He has no relation to the famous Mahatma Gandhi. It's just some other random guy who happened to be named Gandhi. He married the daughter of Nehru, and so her name is Indira Gandhi. And now her descendants have largely run the party. So her son, Rajiv, became prime minister after her. And then after he's assassinated, his widow, Sonia Gandhi, has largely run the party behind the scenes. So basically there's this long coterie of Gandhis running this party. Its main rival, which in the most recent elections basically trounced it, is the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party. So this party actually arose relatively recently. So only in the past 20 or 30 years did this party come into existence and start to really become powerful. This is often thought of as the Hindu Nationalist Party. And so a lot of times it will run on a platform of sort of Hindu power, Hindus first. It has very close links to some explicitly pro-Hindu groups, and its current prime minister, Narendra Modi, he was originally the chief minister of Gujarat and was implicated by some journalists at the time in various anti-Muslim pogroms that were run in the state. The details of that are still a bit fuzzy, of course, but this is sort of like the background of the party to a certain extent. Now, in terms of economics, the Indian National Congress, its base is typically thought of as farmers. So a lot of times it runs on a platform of providing benefits to farmers, oftentimes sort of not necessarily well thought out programs, but they sound good and win votes. The BJP's base is actually the middle class, so in particular higher caste Hindus in the middle class, although recently it's been expanding its base up quite a bit. Part of the reason why it won this current election is because the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, he actually instituted some very helpful policies in Gujarat when he ran that particular state. And so he's seen as being able to bring economic growth. So he's not just the candidate of Hindu nationalism. He's also seen as the candidate of pro-growth policies. Now, in addition to these main parties here, and so you can see all these little tiddly parties and their coalitions, it's also useful to know about the left parties here. So the most important are the communist parties in India. So there's the Communist Party of India and the Communist Party of India Marxist. So there's actually two major communist parties in India. So these parties are important because they actually run, so historically they've run two states in India. So Kerala here has historically been run by the Communist Party of India, and over here West Bengal has often been run by the Communist Party of India Marxist. Now these parties call themselves communist parties. They're not actually communists. They're not trying to, overthrow capitalism. They're really just capitalism with more social policies, basically. In some sense, you could think of them a little bit more like Labour in Britain historically, or I guess currently under Jeremy Corbyn, or fairly left-wing parties. And then there's a lot of state parties. So a lot of these are parties that will only contest in a single state. Nevertheless, they tend to do quite well. So in particular, the DMK and the AIDMK, for example. So the AIDMK in particular holds a lot of power in Tamil Nadu. It currently runs Tamil Nadu. It's almost, and its leader, Jayalalitha, is extraordinarily prominent. She's a former movie actress, and she has essentially run the state for the past several years. All right, so that's politics at the national and the state level. Now, it's also important to know about politics at the local level. So, since the early 90s, India passed a constitutional amendment requiring there to be a big expansion of government at the local level. So this is called the Panchayat system, or Panchayati Raj sometimes. So there are three levels of local government. One is at the district level. This is the district Panchayat. They're sometimes called the Zilla Panchayat. The sub-district Panchayat, or the Taluk Panchayat, or the Samati Panchayat. And then the village Panchayat, sometimes called the Gram Panchayat. So these will look a little bit like the upper level sometimes. So for example, at the village level, the village will elect a village council, and then they'll also have a village council president. So that president is often elected directly, unlike at the upper level. Sometimes that president is elected indirectly. So the people will elect a council, and then those councilors will together decide who the president is. It varies by state. They all have some ability to sort of dictate these rules. So that is the basic structure of local government. As I said, it varies across states, so it's a little bit hard to make generalizations about it. So there's one last very, very important thing you need to know about Indian politics, and this is reservation. So reservation is an extreme form of affirmative action in India. So basically, as you know, or you might have heard, India has historically had some very disadvantaged groups because of the caste system. So let me just show you some actual data we have here. This might make this a bit more concrete. So let's take a look at Karnataka here. So this is giving us the results of local government elections in Karnataka. So this is we have here a bunch of candidates, so like vice chairman. So this is the second in command after the village council president. But you can see here, you have all of these districts or blocks, and then this is basically the name of the village. These are all the candidates. And so you can see here, there's this column for reservation. So this is basically telling you whether the seat is reserved. Now, there are a bunch of different categories of castes in India. So one is called the scheduled castes. These are the castes that were heavily disadvantaged, and they are sort of, in some ways, the most favored for reservation. They're also, by far, if you look at their economically, they are just far worse off than many other communities. So in some sense, it's almost an understatement to say that they're like African Americans in the U.S. Then there are the scheduled tribes. So these are tribal people, a little bit like Native Americans in the U.S. Basically, they lived separate from most settled society in India historically, and now again they're quite disadvantaged. Then there's another category called this is literally what they're called, the other backwards castes. So you can see here OBC. This is basically this category here. So we have scheduled caste, scheduled tribe up here, and then OBC. So this is another group that is not as disadvantaged as these scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, but they've been marked as needing some affirmative action as well. All right, so essentially what happens is seats will basically be reserved. So in this case, I guess none of these data seem to have reservations here, but so this is done both at the village level and at the state and national level. So there will be districts that are literally reserved for these categories. So what that means is, let's take a look over here. You can see here we have a assembly constituency, AC type. And so this AC type tells you the reservation status. So this assembly here, Sirpuru, is general, meaning anybody can run. It doesn't matter what your caste background is. But if you go down here to this assembly constituency, Dornakal, this is reserved for people of scheduled tribes. So what that means is only scheduled tribe people who are officially designated as historically from scheduled tribes, only these people are allowed to stand for this seat. So you can't run for office unless you are a scheduled tribe person. Whereas in this general one, anybody can run. And you can see over here, go further down, there are also some that are reserved for scheduled caste people. So only scheduled caste members can stand for office in this. Recently, reservation has also been extended to women. So that has not, I don't think that has yet been done for, at the state level. It may have been done at the national level, but it has been done at the local level. So you'll have village council presidencies, for example, reserved for women. So only women can run for office there. And so this is sort of how India is trying to mandate that the government better represents the interests of these historically disadvantaged groups. And so we have evidence that, in fact, it does work. So people of scheduled castes are more likely to enact policies favorable to scheduled caste people. Women are more likely to enact they will enact different types of program than men. So this is a lot of economic research recently is focused on this fact. All right, so that's basically all I have right now. So I should give you a brief, well, maybe not as brief as I had hoped, but a relatively brief introduction to Indian politics.